I don't make you guys feel old or anything, but Jarome Iginla's son is now old enough to be draft eligible in 2024. So that's who we're going to talk about today on Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day, even if the episode is probably going live at midnight Eastern. It's fine, don't worry about it. Thank you for making us your first listen. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, on YouTube and on Sirius XM. And I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. With Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/locked-on to start hiring now. Terms and conditions apply. We've got a new prospect profile for you today. We're talking all about Tij Iginla, who is, that's right, Jarome Iginla's son. He is draft eligible. I am as old as the hills, and so are all of you. But he's a really fun and interesting and exciting player. So I've got Derek Neumeier of McKeen's Hockey to come and talk to me about how he's like his dad, how he differs, and what his ceiling is or what his ceiling could be in the NHL. So I'm just going to get into my conversation with Derek because he is much smarter than I am and says it in a much better way. There are a ton of promising players coming out of the WHL for this upcoming draft. We've looked at a couple of them, but there's a ton more that might be as exciting, more exciting, who can say? But I've got Derek Neumeier of McKeen's Hockey here to come and talk to me about a couple of them. And today we are going to be talking all about Tij Iginla. And this particular prospect makes me feel incredibly old because we're kind of hitting that point where players that I have seen play and their children are now old enough to be drafted into the NHL. We've seen it with Josh Doan this year. I saw Shane Doan play when he was still playing, and now Jarome Iginla's child is apparently old enough to be drafted into the NHL, which feels insane to me. But let's start off with just kind of a basic intro question of like, if the Blue Jackets end up drafting Iginla, which they might, you never know, what kind of player are they getting from him?
Well, you're getting a player who is a lot like his dad in most ways that he plays the game. Most of the skills he has, his strengths, his weaknesses. The apple certainly did not fall far from the tree in this instance. Iginla is more of a modern day kind of power forward with more of a slant towards goal scoring, but the playmaking is coming along pretty nicely as well. He's a player who he always seems to make something good happen whenever he's on the ice. And he gets the reputation for being a big goal scorer, which he is. I mean, that's undeniable. He scored at a torrid pace during the regular season. He has been lights out so far in the playoffs. He almost single-handedly carried Kelowna through the first round, got them to the second round. So we're going to be seeing more of him in the playoffs. But he just has this gravitas about him that I love. And his dad is actually very, very similar. Like Iginla Sr., Jarome, he was such a good leader, such a consistent player, such a fierce competitor. Like there were years where he just carried the Calgary Flames, where he had no support around him, and he was still putting up, 30, 40 goals, putting up like MVP caliber seasons. And Tij is a lot like that. He just doesn't seem to get fazed by competition. He seems like when the spotlight gets brighter on him, he's able to actually elevate his game. Whereas a lot of other players, they kind of shrink a little bit when the spotlight gets a little bright. So Tij just has this big game persona to him that I really love. He's hyper competitive. He's hyper focused. He really loves digging in and battling for pucks. He's great as a shooter, but he's really good at controlling the puck as well. He's able to create a lot of space for himself to shoot. Some guys might have a big shot, but they have trouble actually creating the opportunities for themselves. They need to rely on having good playmakers around them to kind of feed them. Iginla's got that one-on-one ability where whether it's, trying to make a move on the rush, whether it's trying to take the puck from the wall, get it towards the net. Like, he's just got so many good moves one-on-one. He's so strong on the puck. He's very elusive with his hands. He understands the offensive zone very well. He's good at going with the flow, trying to, break the patterns of the offensive or the opposing team. And he's just such a dynamic player. It just seems like whenever he steps on the ice, there's always that chance that he's going to do something really, really big. And he usually does. He's just able to consistently make an impact. And you can just see this look in his eyes sometimes, like when he gets the puck or, he has a chance to do something really special. He just really loves to seize those moments. And I think that's the type of thing that's going to be very, very appealing to NHL teams and should translate well to the NHL because, the NHL is the most competitive hockey league in the world, right? Especially when you get to the playoffs. Like, it's all battles all the time. You need to have players that are going to show up for the fight, that they're going to be in the zone, that they're not going to, get scared or, take their foot off the gas pedal. With Iginla, not only does he have the talent as a shooter, the one-on-one ability, the puck control, a very sneakily good playmaker as well, but he also has that X factor, I find, with his mental game that just gives him an edge over a lot of other prospects in this draft.
Is that why? Because I feel like he's a guy that has just kind of been rising and rising on basically everyone's draft boards as the season has. Like, at the beginning of the season, there was a lot of talk about, Jarome Iginla's kid's draft eligible this year. Is someone going to take a flyer on him because of who his dad is? And then as the season's kind of gone on, he's like, he's a first round pick. And then, Calgary's going to be right in the right place to take him. And now people are saying, well, is Montreal going to take him? And Montreal's probably sitting at 6 or 7 overall. So, is it just that people are kind of seeing that compete level, or is there something else that you think is kind of making people think, this kid's going to keep on rising up draft boards?
There are different factors at play. So last year he was a member of the Seattle Thunderbirds, and they were the team that won the championship in the WHL. They were a great team, very, very dangerous, a lot of forward depth. So Iginla, as a 16-year-old, didn't get a lot of ice time. So maybe he didn't get the same opportunity to shine quite as much as some other players did last year. So maybe that kind of started him a little bit behind in lists compared to some of the other players, especially guys in the WHL like Berkeley Catton and Ryder Ritchie, who got to be top 6 players last year on their teams. And then this year, Iginla got traded from Seattle to Kelowna. So new team, new environment. It didn't really take him long to adjust. He was kind of great right from the start of the season. But I just think people they didn't have a good book on him yet. Like, I watched him last year, but I wasn't fully sure what to expect. I was really looking forward to watching him, but I didn't have a good feel for him yet. But kind of coming back to what I was saying about the spotlight, I almost wonder if that has played a part in it as well. Like, he started to feel this buzz about Iginla early on in the season because he was, making a lot of really good plays. He was scoring some big goals. And, people started to pay more and more attention to him, started talking about him more. And it seems like his game just kept getting better and better. The more people started talking about him, the more people started to watch him play. So maybe that was a little bit of it. But he's just such a smart player. Like, you can tell with some players when they're raised by NHL stars. Not always. It's not a guarantee that the son of a former pro is going to be great. But sometimes you can just see all the advantages that it has brought. And with Iginla, you can really see it. Just the way he carries himself, the way he's able to adapt his game, the way he's able to grow and evolve, and just the way that he doesn't really back down. Like, some players start hot, maybe they take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit, and then they kind of coast through parts of the season. Whereas with Iginla, like, that's not the way he thinks the game. He thinks it more in a professional level or a professional mindset where, you need to play every shift, you need to play every game, and you always need to keep trying to get better and pushing yourself to get better. So I think there are different reasons why he has been rising on draft boards lately, but it's not like a recency bias sort of situation where, he's been great lately and maybe people are overreacting to how great he's been lately. Like, this has been steady. Like, you can see it step by step the whole way throughout this season. And that's a great sign for him moving forward, because you want to draft prospects who are on an upward trajectory, who've shown the ability to grow and improve and develop, because they're going to need to keep doing that. The last thing you want is a player who starts to kind of like level out at this point in their season, maybe going into the draft with no momentum behind them. Iginla's the opposite. Like, this is a guy who's consistently getting better, consistently learning, consistently becoming more dangerous. And I think that's part of the appeal there, just because you see that he knows how to keep improving his game. So it's a good sign that he's going to be able to keep doing that once he transfers probably to the AHL and then eventually to the NHL down the road.
Before we move on and talk a little bit more about Iginla with Derek, I've got to let you know all about Factor. Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. They've got a weekly menu of 35 different options. They've got calorie smart options, keto, protein plus. They've got vegan and veggie options. They've got breakfast, on the go, lunch, snacks, beverages that you can add on to these meals to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. If you're anything like me and you are a gremlin person that mostly eats like cereal and almonds, then Factor is the meal service for you. Get chef prepared meals on the table in 2 minutes so you can get back to doing what you love this spring. Head to factormeals.com/lockedonnhl50. Use code lockedonnhl50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box as well. That's code lockedonnhl50 at factormeals.com/lockedonnhl50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about next. Actually, is kind of his development path, and it's so rare for players to, unless you like go 1 or 2 overall. Players typically will go back to college or back to their junior team or wherever. Is that kind of what you see happening with Iginla? Is he going back to Kelowna next year, or is he the kind of guy that you think he could probably? Obviously, again, it depends on the team that drafts him. I feel like Cole Sillinger was a really notable one of. If the Blue Jackets hadn't been just so miserably bad, he probably wouldn't have made the team. But he did, played the entire season as an 18-year-old, had a really great rookie season. Could you kind of see the same thing happening with Iginla? Is he a guy that you think he's going to come into training camp and make the team, like, force the team to keep him around, basically? Because that was the thing with Cole Sillinger, was they kept saying, we're looking for reasons to get rid of you, and you're just not getting, you're not giving us any, so I guess we keep you around until you give us a reason not to. Is that kind of the trajectory that you could see Iginla on?
It's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if it were to happen, but you're right. I think it really is going to depend on where he ends up going and more or less what their philosophy is, the philosophy of the team. Because there are some teams, they just really prefer to not have 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds on their roster, because you do run into a risk sometimes of just not putting a player in a good development situation at a key point in the development arc of their careers. Sillinger is actually kind of a good example. He had a great rookie season, and then his game just has not
back to Medicine Hat. I think he was supposed to go back to.
Yeah, Medicine Hat was where he was, or they had his rights. But yeah, it just his career hasn't quite gone probably as well as the Jackets had hoped overall, aside from that rookie season. Right now, maybe he's not where they want him to be, but you run into these risks sometimes with these young players. They're not dominating at junior levels. They're not getting a chance to get their feet wet in the AHL before transitioning to the NHL. So you do run a risk sometimes with players when you put them into the NHL too early. So you might have a team that drafts Iginla, but regardless of how well he plays in the preseason, they might just put him straight back in the junior just because they think that's the best thing for him long term. And personally, that's where I would be as well. Even if he has a great training camp and a great preseason, I'd probably be pretty inclined to send him back to Kelowna. But you also might see a situation where they give him that 9-game tryout, which a lot of young players get. Put him in the roster, give him a few games, see how he does. If he's continuing to get better and he looks like he's actually able to thrive at the NHL level, that he's not just kind of surviving and can hang on in like a bottom 6 role. If he's truly thriving in that 9-game call-up, I think it'd be pretty hard to send him back down. I would say that's probably the most likely scenario. I think any team that drafts him is going to be very, very excited about him. He still has a little bit more physical development that he needs to do. You also run that risk sometimes with these younger guys, these teenagers, because they're not physically developed. If they get hit into the boards, they might not have enough of like muscle mass and strength to kind of bounce off the check well. They might absorb a lot of that punishment, which can lead to injuries sometimes. So Iginla's pretty sturdy, he's pretty strong, but physically he could probably stand to, add a few more pounds and work on his strength and conditioning for another year or two before he's probably ready for the full grind of an 82 game NHL season. But yeah, I think it could go in different directions. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going back to Kelowna, and I also wouldn't be surprised if he, ends up sticking with an NHL team. But I think it's really going to depend on the team that takes him and what their philosophy is for developing prospects.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I feel like that's something that always gets kind of not necessarily forgotten about in terms of prospects being pro ready, is that like he's 17. He's not going to turn 18 until August, that's still a kid, and you see it again with, even an 18, 19, even sometimes 20-year-olds, and you're like, well, they're an adult. I'm like, no, that's still basically a kid. Like it's okay that he's not ready for the NHL yet. But it kind of to that train of thought, Iginla gets drafted, he goes to the team, they do training camp, whatever, and then what do you think they say to him in terms of like, right, go back to juniors, work on this and this, and then, we'll see you whenever your junior season finishes next spring? Like, what does he have to work on over the next kind of 18 months to a year to really be kind of ready to take that step into the NHL, do you think?
There's not a lot, truthfully. His game is quite well rounded. I mean, you could certainly say that there could be gains to be made in his explosiveness and his agility. I mean, he's a good skater. I wouldn't say it's certainly a weakness, but he's, not necessarily the fastest guy on the ice anytime he steps out there. He's good in a straight line. He builds up a good amount of power. His skating mechanics are good, but he's not like a blazingly fast guy. His agility, his edge work, it's also good, but he could stand to get a little bit better. So I'd say focus a lot on the skating. Right now, he can be a little shot focused at times, a little of an individual one-man army. And part of that is his situation in Kelowna, because they do have a younger, not the most deep team. So I can understand some of the inclinations he has to be a bit of a puck hog. And honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if his coaches kind of encouraged him to do that a little bit, because he's usually going to be the biggest scoring threat on the ice, even if he does it by himself. So maybe try to get a little bit more focus on using his teammates, try to round out his game a little bit more. He might get some more opportunities to play center in Kelowna next year. He started this year playing a bit of center, then has been mostly on the wing throughout the rest of the season. So there might be a little bit of that, more time on the penalty kill. I would say they'd probably just focus more on rounding out his game. But more than anything else, I think they'd probably just encourage him just to try and be like one of the best players in the league. Just kind of elevate that other part of his game, the mental part, where, you're leading a top team. You're not just fighting to get into the playoffs. You're fighting to be one of the best teams in the league. Fight to get on the roster for the World Juniors, try and go for a gold medal. So encourage him to, not focus too much on the future. Try to focus more on the present, enjoy your time in junior, be with your friends and enjoy the challenge of that league. Enjoy the highs that you can get from winning a league championship or a gold medal. And, take those experiences just to make you a bit more of a mature player overall. You'll be coming back in a different role, in a different mindset, because he'll have been to NHL training camps. He'll have been drafted. That can change a player a bit psychologically. They come back with a little bit more pressure, more expectation to be a leader and kind of share some of what they've learned with their teammates. And that can be good for players as well, because, it helps them mature a little bit, helps them develop more leadership skills. So I don't think there's anything that Iginla necessarily needs to focus on if he goes back to junior, but I think there could still be a lot of growth in a lot of different areas.
I also have to tell you about Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. They are the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. You can do it all on Indeed. You can find top talent fast with their suite of powerful hiring tools. They've got instant match, they've got virtual assessments, they've got virtual interviews. You don't have to wait for any of this either. Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. I use Indeed when I am unlucky enough to be job hunting. They're the only job site I use. I think they are the easiest one, the best one. I found all of the best job options on there. So I can only imagine that hiring through Indeed is just as great as job hunting through them. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. So with Indeed, you're only going to pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/locked-on to start hiring now. Go to Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing isn't available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Yeah, for sure. It's that kind of, you see this with top prospects a lot, is would you rather have them being the guy on their junior team or their college team or whatever, or do you want them in the NHL surrounded by NHL players and learning that way? It's really, I think it's kind of, again, depends on how you what your development team is like as an NHL team, but it's always an interesting, like, what's better for the player? Is it him being the big fish in the little pond, or is it him being the little fish in the big pond and learning from the other big fish?
And something that you see a lot too in the NHL is the guys who often have the most success in the playoffs, they've been there before. You know, they've led their junior teams to championships. They won AHL championships. I think that type of experience is very, very valuable, because sometimes you get a player, you put him in the NHL too early on a team that's always losing. It's hard to kind of develop that winning mindset, just learning that ability to just find that extra edge when you've got like a 7-game series where you've seen these guys over and over and over again, and they're competing as hard as they possibly can. You know, there's something to be said about knowing how to win. And if you can get that at the junior level or internationally, it's definitely an advantage going forward to the NHL.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk a little bit about the Blue Jackets in terms of their draft, because they are, I believe, locked into 29th in the league. They can't jump up over another team, and another team can't jump up over them. So they have the 4th best odds for Celebrini right now, which is great, but they don't win the lottery. They draft 4th overall. Who are you picking at 4th overall if you're the Blue Jackets?
Well, that's a very good question, because there's a lot of debate right now who would even be the best player at 4th, or who would even be the best player at 2nd or 3rd.
It's yeah, exactly. After celebrating, I feel like it's really, I've asked this question to every prospect guy that I've spoken to, and I think I've had 7 different answers. You know,
Yeah.
So it really is so subjective, but just for the fun of it, you know, who's 4th on your board? Let's say.
For me right now, like everyone else in the hockey world, it's Celebrini at 1. At 2, it's, I would say, a 3-horse race right now between Ivan Demidov, the Russian winger who has just electrifying amounts of skill, and then 2 defensemen. So I really like Artyom Levshunov at Michigan State, the big right-handed Belarusian defenseman who is, you know, very physically imposing, very explosive in his skating, very strong. Just kind of forces his will on the game quite a lot. And I also really, really like Sam Dickinson on the London Knights, who is one of the best skaters in the draft, might even arguably be the best skater in the entire draft, forward or defense. He's 6'3". He's got these long, beautiful strides. He gets up to speed so fast, so effortlessly. And he's pretty good with the puck. He's got a big shot from the point, and he's playing a lot of minutes on that London Knights team. He's still got some issues with his decision-making and his awareness, but London is such a good program for developing talent that I feel like he's in a really good situation to, you know, have those weak parts of his game ironed out a little bit and have his strengths kind of maximized. So those would be the 3 guys right there for me.
Yeah.
There's also
one of those guys is available at 4.
Yeah. But also at the same time, if Columbus were picking 4th and they decided to go for Caden Lindstrom of the Medicine Tigers, or maybe Anton Salayev, like those are also justifiable decisions. They wouldn't be the ones that I would make necessarily, but they would certainly be justifiable. So if Columbus ends up with a Lindstrom or Slyev, you can tell Blue Jackets fans not to try and burn the city
it's gonna
down.
be okay. Like,
it's
that's the thing.
it's really close between a lot of very good players.
Right. I feel like once you get past Celebrini, it's, you know, like last year, obviously it was, well, there is Bedard, and then there is Fantilli and Carlson, and then one of 3 or 4 guys. But I feel like once you get past Celebrini this year, like, they could draft one of 10 guys at second, and I would be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And if you went at second or if you went at 10th, I would be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. So it's going to be a really interesting draft. It's really difficult to predict. But if people want to kind of maybe catch up on some more WHL specific scouting, because I know that's kind of your area where you're based, where can people find you and your work online?
Twitter is the best hub for that, or X now, I guess that's what it's called. My handle is Derek_N_NHL, and I work for McKeen's Hockey, so you can also follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to our website. We've got the draft guide, which is our big focus every year. That comes out right before the draft. But we're also branching out into YouTube and Spotify. So we've got articles on our website. We've got podcasts on Spotify. We've got videos on YouTube. So we're trying to provide all kinds of different prospect content in different areas, whatever fans want to use to learn about prospects, basically.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow morning, we are going to be talking about tonight's game, which was just a disaster from start to finish. So we'll talk about that. We'll check in with the Blue Jackets prospects that were at the Frozen Four. We'll check in with some CHL playoff series that are starting, some that are finished. We'll check in with our friend Oiva Keskinen over in La Liga. And we'll talk about a little bit of all of that. Some fun, some not so fun. You know the drill, the usual. Here at Locked On Blue Jackets, I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.